The Price of Salt. Okay, so I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Let's just start off the bat with that. I do think that The Price of Salt is important and was very progressive for the time, and the writing style was great. I just got so bored. It's pretty much just a love story, and we're following the main character who falls in love instantly with this middle-aged woman who's in the middle of a divorce, weird age difference, awkward relationship, weird obsession. One scene really ticked me off where the main character gets really angry that the divorced woman picks her child over her lover, which is like, girl, grow up. I know you're just like 19 or something, but that makes this relationship so weird and unhealthy. And I don't know. I did not feel this like, oh my gosh, we're meant for each other kind of love. And I mean, I'm annoyed by romance anyway, so this did not help. The first sentence is, the lunch hour in the co-workers cafeteria at Frankenberg's had reached its peak. And I predicted 2.5 stars. Yeah, honestly, my enjoyment was 2.5. I'm just rounding up because I do understand the importance, and having a book published in the 1950s with such a strong lesbian relationship, yada, 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 yada. I get it. If you're a romance reader, this might be wonderful, but I just got annoyed and bored. Sorry. I am looking forward to discussing this as part of the Spilling Tea book club. That's always awesome, and I know that we're going to have some people on there who fell in love with this book, because the way that I understand other people's reading taste in that group, I know that it's going to be an interesting discussion with some people who really love this book. So let's see how that's gonna play out. Monster. Oh my gosh, Monster is amazing. It's a 5 out of 5 star, like hands down. This is so good. Monster is pretty much a legal drama. It's like a courtroom. It feels like an episode of a courtroom something. And the fun way is that it is written in a way that out of the person's perspective that we're following is writing a script for a TV movie. So we have a lot of dialogue. We have like a script. We have little notes. It's even like the formatting is amazing. Whenever we have like separations and chapters and stuff, we have like little notes that feel like a diary entry from the character that we're following. The rest is just like a script. It's like fade in, interior, early morning in cell block D, Manhattan Detention Center. Cut to, fade in, fade out, etc., etc. And then most of this is just like script and dialogue, and it is so well done. It just felt like reading a TV show, and it is just so gripping and so well done. It's a very quick read, and you start to understand throughout this case in court that we have a young black boy who is charged with being accessory to murder, walking out of a store. And I'm not gonna tell you too much about it, but you start really getting anxious about this whole process, and if it's going to do right by this boy, and or if it is not. And there's just so much emotion in this without being emotional. But I don't know, it was so good. I think I read this in like 1.5 to let's say like in 2 hours. It has 200 and something, 280 pages, but because of the style it's written, you could fly through this, and it's so worth the read. And I think I predicted amazing, because the first sentence really already tells you what wild ride this whole book is gonna be. The best time to cry is at night, when the lights are out and someone is being beaten up and screaming for help. Wild ride. Totally worth it. Totally recommend. Zeit für Träume, die Senfblütensaga, is a book that I should not like. There's no reason for me to like this book, but I do. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is a historical romance of sorts. It plays in Germany and Elsass-Lothringen, so that's like the French-German part where we had like some occupation back and forth, and it was French, and then it was German, French, German. At that point in time, it was German. This plays in the early 1900s, I think 1908. So we're not in wartime, but you can feel it in the air. A young woman called Emma who wants to go to university and study. She's a little bit naive when it comes to that, but that feels true to the character in a way. She's like, oh, I want to go to university. And when she's been asked, like, what do you want to study? She's like, I don't know. I just want to learn. I just want to go. And she's so overwhelmed by wanting to fight, wanting to pursue that and not becoming a housewife, just mash potatoes all day, that she doesn't really think about the path, like where she actually wants to go. It's more about focusing on what she doesn't want to do. Actually, that is usually one of the tropes that I hate, when women that in a historical context do not want to be what they want to be, and they want to be more of a 2020 person. And when it feels like the author might push worldviews and just thoughts and things onto, like, channels that into a person that is in a very different place in history, and it just doesn't feel historically correct. Yes, of course, there have been women in 1908, 1909 who wanted to go to university and study, because if there weren't, we wouldn't be where we are right now. And that is the time when universities started to allow women to go and study. So it is a thing, but it's about how the author approaches the mindset that it feels true to the time. And that is usually done very wrong in my perspective. But then again, I have very, very little historical knowledge to determine what is right and wrong. I can just tell that something feels very 2020, or something that feels a little bit more true to the historical setting. In this case, it did not feel so bad. It didn't feel too wrong. So I was able to look past that. Then we have this young man who is coincidentally the same name as my grandfather. Like his first and his last name is the same name as my grandfather, Karl Seidel. He has the same initials as I do, CS, whereas my grandfather was a KS, but C.Seidel feels very familiar to me. It has been my signature for the longest time before I got married. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, you know? It just feels very familiar, and I love having a book that has that. And then also, like, when we first meet Karl, we meet him in Düsseldorf, which is pretty much where I live, in 1905. But Karl is supposed to take over the family business, but he doesn't want to take over the family business. He wants to build his own factory, like a mustard factory. He's really passionate about mustard. Now these two people meet, and we have a little bit of a love story. It's about like encouraging each other to walk your own path and build your own future and everything. And it was so cute and sweet, and it is a romance. We have a few more characters in here that could make it a triangle. These other characters add a little bit spice to it. Was everything that happened in here necessary? Definitely not. And some things at the end just got a little bit annoying. I also am confused. This is supposed to be a saga and has 3 books. And I'm like, this could have been one wonderful book. I don't think it needs 3 books, but I don't know if we're gonna go into next generations or something. I am very critical about the next one. In this one, it's all about how they're meeting, the life setup, the family setup. The family part in a lot of parts feels very real, and the construct and the restrictions that the family, like expectations and the social expectations, the social norms build, it feels very real. The romance feels a little bit of insta-love, but also slow burn at the same time, and it just feels very real as well in a way, and I found it cute. I found it was building each other up in a way that I just felt like, ooh, I'm shipping them. And there were a lot of elements that I loved. There's a few things at the end where I'm like, okay, the author is just adding that to add another 100 pages, and that's not necessary. You do not need that climax in this form of romance family saga. you don't need to have this like drama. I also felt like one of the characters took a development that felt a little bit forced and fake. I have read in a few reviews that some people say that it's historically quite inaccurate, which I can't determine. So because I couldn't tell, it doesn't bother me. But just as a disclaimer, if you're like a history buff and you know a lot about like 1905, 1910, Germany / France, you might see some inconsistencies with the time. I just felt drawn in by the characters, and even though I couldn't agree with the characters all the time, and I didn't feel like, oh, I'm relating to this one character so much, this is so like me, this is like the perfect human. I don't want a perfect human being. I think having a character that is annoying at times is fine. A character that is naive at times and that acts differently than I do is fine. That's why I'm reading different types of books. Also, I love this cover. But I've always been like, I love middle grade and romance covers, and then I don't like the content in most romance books, but this cover, you know, the only thing that would make this cover even better is if like these flowers and stuff and the typography was golden, like yellowish golden, like foiled. That's like the only way that I could see this being better. We Are Not Free by Tracy G. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I was really pumped for this one. I was really excited about this one because I was in for like some historical fiction, Japanese American internment camps, out of the eyes of teenagers. It all sounded really, really good and interesting. Now, for me, it potentially just wasn't the right format. We're following 14 teenagers, and every chapter is following a different teenager. So it feels like, even though it's one overarching story of these teenagers from like one area going into one internment camp, etc., it still feels like short stories. So you're able to connect to the characters a little bit better than in short stories that are completely disconnected, but still you're not as able to connect to the characters as you would be in a full novel, because it just focuses on a different person. Now, this is something that has dampened my enjoyment, but is not what is the cause for it not to be 5 stars, but 3 stars. The main reason why this is ending up being a 3 and not a 5-star is that we're talking about some very serious issues. We're talking about some very serious things that are happening. But these teenagers they're talking about loss, they're talking about things, but it doesn't transport out of the story. They're never afraid, they're never scared, they're never confused or like with question marks about the future. They're just tagging along, and they're much more focused on, oh, I want to kiss the boy, I want to go to the dance with the boy, I want to do this, I want to go to, do I go to the army, do I go study at university? In a way that's good, that there's this sense of normalcy and that you can see the sense of what teenagers are focused on as well. But the way that it is written, it completely diminishes from the overall thing that is happening, because the loss of everything that they own, being forced to live in an internment camp, not knowing what's happening, it's not scary, it's not confusing. It's just something that's like, all right, let's move to another place. And it feels like it doesn't touch most of the teenagers at all. There's just a little tiny bit of racism in this book where you're like, oof, okay, that feels real. And it's just too little for this topic to be talking about the seriousness. Honestly, even if teenagers are like, oh, let's sneak out and go kiss behind a bush, even though there's a curfew, it never feels serious. It never feels like they could be caught, or what would happen if they get caught. It never feels like the parents are like, oh my gosh, this is serious. We have families in here where the fathers have been taken to a different camp before they were, like, the whole area was relocated, and so they're without their father, or there's some dramatic scenes in here, or there's the potential for dramatic scenes, but then it's not really touched on, and it's not connecting to the drama side of it, to the negative, to the dark side of it. We're just, the only thing that is written in a way that you can connect to is, oh my gosh, that's such a cute boy. And no. The way that it's written, it's very easy to read, and I think that you can fly through. And if you are into short stories, this could be much better. And there is a few short stories that are really good, and a lot of people like it. So maybe I just have weird feelings. Some of the stories are, the writing style is so different that you really feel like somebody else is telling the story. But I feel like in the 4th or 5th chapter that stopped, so I was really blown away by that skill in the very beginning. I also really like that there's graphics and things to add to the whole mood and to the whole experience, and there is some impactful stuff in here. It's just not going all the way as much as I would have wished. So it's not a bad book. There's a lot of good potential, but I had wished for something different, I think. The first sentence was, it's been over 3 months since the attack on Pearl Harbor, and my oldest brother, Maz, has told me to come straight home from school each day. I predicted a 4.5, and I do think that if it would have been one book, one novel, focusing on less people than 14, vibe from the first sentence would have continued, it definitely would have been a 4.5, but sorry to say, it has not. The Book of the Night Women was a disappointment for me. Did I end up giving it 2 or 3 stars? I had really high hopes for this because I love exploring history and learning more about different cultures. So this is Jamaica, 1785. We're on a plantation, and we're basically following this girl who is born to one of the masters and somebody else, and she's mixed. And I was ready for this. This sounds like a book that I would love. This girl ends up being part of this group, and we're talking about rebellion simmer, incidents of sadism and madness run rampant, and the tangled web of power relationships dramatically unravels amid dangerous secrets and unspoken jealousies. At the heart of it all stands Lilith, unbearably vulnerable and frighteningly potent, whose passions jeopardize the Night Women's schemes. So the Night Women is a clandestine council of fierce slaves plotting an island-wide revolt. Now, my issue with this was not the language. I know that a few people have issues with the language. I believe that it plays in Jamaica, so it's not AAVE, but it's very similar. I don't know what's historically correct to call it, but it is not American English and it's not British English. The writing needs potentially a little bit to get into. The language is very drastic, it's very raw, it uses a lot of language that you probably do not... Can you shut up? I hope it's not too loud. I apologize for my neighbor doing work in the garden. It uses language that you probably don't want your kids to hear. Very drastic, very real. And all of that creates an atmosphere that's quite interesting. What I couldn't look past though, and what I struggled with, is that I could not connect to the main character whatsoever. She annoyed the fuck out of me, to be very clear. I like a good character arc. I like a flawed person that we then accompany on their journey to learning what it is to be a better person, or even not. If not, I love a flawed person, but this flawed person just annoyed me and I could not follow her. I started drifting off in my mind because I just didn't want to be there when she was there. She just annoyed me so much because I could not get to the point where I'm like, ooh, that's a beautiful character arc, that's a beautiful development, and I was just annoyed. I couldn't, and I'm sorry, because I do think that there's a lot of value in this book. As I said, the language, how real and drastic it is. I think that there's a lot of people that this book would bring to the edges of what they can take, if not even further. It ended up annoying me that I was annoyed, and that became like this whole circle, and no. The first sentence was, people think blood red, but blood don't got no color. I expected this to be a 4.5 star. How could you expect a character to annoy me that much that I don't want to read this? The book probably is still good for a lot of people, so check it out yourself. Yolk. I loved Yolk so much. Yolk is about two sisters who have grown apart. They are Korean Americans and they are a little bit of opposites, and one is more of a career-focused person. She's quite successful, but she also was more of the nerd in school. And the other is, I would consider her the alternative artsy person. They pretty much stopped talking to each other much. Both of them moved to New York, but they are living separate lives. And then the sister, who is the sister with a career, reaches out and they do meet up, and they learn, well, the other sister learns that the career sister has cancer. Well, rebonding is not necessarily the right word, but they are back in sort of a relationship, and they're back talking, and it's very awkward. It just feels so real to me. The awkwardness and the dancing around each other and the familiarity at the same time. The, oh my God, we are so different. And having their parents in San Antonio, a whole separate life there, a very different type of life. Throughout the journey, we discover that the person who is not the career-driven person might actually be as sick and might require help herself. And we're talking about eating disorder, some traumas there. The very beginning, the author on the first page says, "This is a work of fiction that mirrors aspects of my own history with disordered eating, dysmorphia, and bulimia. For those struggling with body image and food, this story might be emotionally expensive for you. Please be gentle with yourself. Sensitivity is a superpower. And please know that there is no such thing as a bad body. Truly, take up space. It is your birthright." I love this, and I was so thankful that I read this at the beginning because I was prepared. The way that the eating disorder is portrayed wasn't too overshadowing, it wasn't taking up too much space, it wasn't kind of battling with cancer, you know, it wasn't like, ooh, which one's more important, or, you know, it just felt natural, it felt organic, and it felt good to read this story. I loved this so much. It just felt very real, and I could relate to this. I couldn't relate to either sister, especially because both had traits that I related to and then other traits that I didn't relate to, but I could relate to the story and to the setting and everything. And it just, they also talked about that they couldn't eat ramen because they were out of kimchi, which I can relate to too. But, I mean, I can't relate to running out of kimchi, but yeah. So the first sentence is, "Depending on where I focus on how much pressure I apply to the back of my throat, I can just about blot him out." I ended up giving the book 5 out of 5 stars. Let's see what I predicted according to that first line, because that first line didn't really tell me what sort of a ride I was in for. I expected 4.5, so I think I was pretty close. The Hero of Ages. Oh my God, this was so good! So good. This was even better than the second one. I really enjoyed how this one just tied it all together. Some of the plot lines, how they were, I don't want to say twists and turns because I don't want you to be expecting twists and turns when you go into this book, but just some resolutions. That's the right word here. I feel like some resolutions for the characters and some changes in the path and the dynamic. It was just so beautifully done. It was almost too much of a feel-good moment to close this trilogy out for me. Very happy to know that we're still gonna stay in this world and that there's more to come for me. The first sentence in this was, "Marsh struggled to kill himself." And depending on my mood, this could be either a 2 or a 5 star first sentence, because I'm like, oh, don't give it all away in the beginning with that first sentence. But then also, this could be very intriguing. So I can see this having gone either way. And I think in the past it has gone either way. I predicted 4 out of 5 stars. So I think I was close. This is a 4.5 star. I'm leaning towards 5 stars. So Sanderson did it again for me.
Just loving this moment. Can we stay here?